If you feel like there is a need to school me on something, go right ahead. Always here to learn. Hey guys, this is Kim. Welcome back to Fablestan. Today I will be responding to the amazing panel that took place last weekend. I believe it was last weekend. I forgot the exact date, but I was kind of sad that I didn't get to watch it and stream it live or watch it while it was streaming live, but I watched the entire video yesterday and here I am. It's basically a amazing conversation involving I think around 20 panelists from our tarot community, just different tarot peeps from different backgrounds, different identities, and also just from different wakes of life coming together to gather to sort of have an amazing discussion about diversity, representation, the problems with publishing houses, and how we could sort of promote more positive change, how we could topple the machine, I guess, the machine that sort of prioritizes white as the default and people of color as secondary and not profitable, all that jazz. So that video talked about a lot of those, and I think towards the end it also talked about pose some questions to deck creators in particular, and as a deck creator I felt like I wanted to respond and also want to respond to some of the points raised just throughout that video, and also want to talk about what I learned from that video and also just kind of my own experiences, etc. So it's sort of like a mishmash of like response video plus vlog and plus sort of just me exploring my thoughts and trying to make sense of my musings. So yeah, if you want to check it out, it's titled An Open Dialogue to Bring Healing to the Tarot Community. I will leave the link down below in the description box, and I definitely recommend just checking it out. It is like 2.5 hours long, maybe like 2 hours and like 40 minutes. So I would say like you really need to sit down with this one. Like you really need to block out like a chunk of time just to watch it, because I believe like I kind of watched the first 30 minutes and then I kept watching and I watched the rest of it. So it wasn't too bad, but I recommend just watching it in one sitting, because it's definitely very interesting. It was very eye-opening, and it was so amazing to hear from all these different amazing tarot people from that panel. So I'm just so grateful that that happened, and I'm so grateful for Queen Auset to bring forth the discussions. She was a powerful voice, and I'm just so grateful. Okay, I'm just so glad this happened, and I just want to kind of like chime in and just respond to that video and join on a discussion, even though I wasn't part of the panel. I think this video really, like, before I get into it, this video really helped me sort of bring all my ideas together, because I've been wanting to make a video like this for a very long time. I wanted to talk about my musings as a decorator, my musings around diversity and representation and identity. So I wanted to sort of just chime in and then just like share my voice and share my opinions and see where that goes, you know? I remember the first thing that kind of really struck a chord was learning about the word tokenism. Tokenism is basically like the stereotypical portrayal of people of color or people from different gender identities, or people from different identities or different body shapes, are basically a representation of diversity. Tokenism is basically a stereotypical representation and portrayal of that, and also in the name of like meeting the quota, so this deck could qualify as a diverse deck or as a diversely representing deck. So that's called tokenism. It's kind of like you're using minorities or people like a figure from a marginalized group to be your token in a mainly, I guess, white deck. I was just like, a light bulb just went off when I heard of that word, because it really gave me a language and basically a word, a concept to kind of like make sense of my own frustrations with the diverse decks that are out there. Because for the longest time I just remember feeling really annoyed by the so-called diversity decks, or even movies and stories in pop culture. I've been like chronically annoyed. I think I've always just felt that it was tokenism and it wasn't authentic representation, and then it just felt really gimmicky. I remember just feeling very frustrated that these so-called diverse films or diverse stories or diverse decks aren't really diverse, and they are diverse on paper. You can see different kinds of faces, different skin tones, different body types, different gender identities, but it just felt really gimmicky, and it felt like it was kind of pandering. It really felt like it was just sort of like you were just sort of including different types of you're just kind of, it's sort of done in a mathematical way. It was just kind of people from these different groups and different wakes of life were kind of just there to hit a quota. It was there for you to like use as a marketing gimmick, and I've always just had this chronic annoyance with that type of gesture of diversity. It just felt more like a cash grab and it just didn't feel authentic. It felt a little superficial, and I just, for the longest time, I didn't know that was called tokenism. And learning this word really helped me put so many things into perspective. I was like, that was why I was annoyed, and that was why that was the source of my vexation. It was the stereotypical portrayal of what diversity looks like. Something that I really resonated with. I believe Emit from the panel said it. Commenting on this particular chariot card. I forgot which deck it was from, but it basically featured a person in a wheelchair on the chariot card. And I remember when I first saw that card, I honestly forgot what deck it was, but I remember first seeing that card and it just felt kind of off, because I think my first thought was, you are also like, the point of diverse portrayals and representations is to break through and smash through stereotype, is to give more dimension and more nuance to someone who is perpetually misunderstood or have been sort of portrayed by the dominant culture in a really specific way. It's to sort of challenge those ideas and to show a different side to them, to show them as a complete human person. And I remember seeing a person on a wheelchair, like a disabled person, on the chariot card, and I remember feeling kind of weird about it, because I just feel like it was a little objectifying, right? It's kind of like seeing me seeing an Asian person on the Justice card. I mean, not that I mind seeing an Asian person or an Asian figure on the Justice card, because I think it's fucking badass, but I just can't help but think that, is this because like you think we're all like lawyers? Like, is this doctors or accountants or whatever? Like, it's just like, I would love to see Asian people on the star card or other archetypes too. I remember Emmet saying like, it would be great to see like someone in a wheelchair not on the chariot card, because you're obviously highlighting the fact that they're on a wheelchair. It's premised on the fact that they're on a wheelchair, and I really can't speak for that group of people, because I'm obviously not from I'm honestly not part of that group, but I honestly just feel like it was a little objectifying and also patronizing. It's like, you're in a wheelchair, but you're at the chariot card, go, kind of thing. So I remember Emma saying like, it would be great to see someone on a wheelchair on the star card or on a different archetype, not just the archetype that's obviously associated with the one facet of them that needs representation, but it kind of just stops there, if you know what I mean. Like, it's sort of like representation, but it's this one-dimensional representation. It just sort of just became, I guess, stereotypical, right? So I remember thinking like, you know what, that's what I've been feeling, that's what I've been experiencing. Like, the word tokenism really helped me sort of process everything that I've ever felt and thought about stereotypical representations of diversity. So that's the first thing. That was like really, it just felt really like I kind of feel less alone, that I wasn't the only one feeling this way, because I always feel like I was kind of like a freak for disliking diversity, but obviously there's always like a more nuanced perspective when it comes to like even something that kind of looks positive on paper, that kind of just like sort of appears to be positive. There's always like different things to explore, right? So that was the first point. And when it comes to diversity, I always have this conundrum when it comes to diverse representations, or trying to sort of capture the world that we see in the single deck, because it is true that we need more diversity. As an Asian Canadian, or just an Asian person, a person of color, I personally never felt any grievances towards all white decks or decks that are lacking a little representation. I feel like as long as it's not problematic in the portrayals of those people, I personally don't find a problem with it. I remember Queen Auset also saying like she doesn't have any problems with an all white deck. It's just that if you just want to like sneak in like a token minority just to kind of pat us in the back and be like, yeah, okay, yeah, you're in there now, like you don't get to complain kind of thing, then there's an issue. And I agree, because deck creators or creators in general, we would sort of represent the world that we see, the world that we experience into the things that we create. And I personally don't have any issues with seeing an all-white deck or purchasing an all-white deck. I think as long as that deck is thematically pointed, because sometimes like a deck maybe has nothing to offer in the diversity department, but I think there's still a lot of other things that could be part of that deck that it could still offer. Like, you know, tarot is obviously isn't just about gender identity or racial identity. It's also, I mean, those are very important human issues and important facet of human experience. But obviously, there's different parts of things that a tarot deck could offer. For example, like it could be a really great deck for inner child work. It could be a really great deck for ancestral work or things like that. I personally don't have an issue with an all white deck, just because like I think as long as like that's not the only thing that's being generated out of the machine, so to speak. I guess, which is also like part of the problem. It's like not enough of those decks, not enough decks that are non-white are coming out of the machine / publishing houses, or just kind of like mass market. So that's the thing. But what I wanted to say was, I always had this conundrum with diverse representations, because I remember reading one of the comment section, and one of the comments says that it's almost too perfectionist to want accurate representation of every single group and people from every facet of life and people from every kind of gender, every group of identity. It's almost inauthentic to want to capture every single person in a single deck. And because when you do that, it becomes a little shallow and becomes inauthentic, because now you're just like checking off a list, right? And I totally agree, because I just feel like when you try to do that, it really lessens the impact a deck could make, because I feel like a deck of tarot cards isn't just the 78 cards, it's also cohesively, thematically what it offers, like how does everything tie together, what is the collective story that it tells, because the 70 cards of tarot captures the human experience. And in my opinion, of course, it should capture the diversity that we have in our world. Like it should capture the world that we see. This world isn't populated just by one group of people or people with just like one specific skin tone. So it should capture people from different walks of life and different kind of experiences. But I feel like it's almost doing a deck of cards an injustice to try to cram everything in there, because when you try to cram everything in there, you can't please everyone. It becomes washed down. It's just this washed out version of a diversity deck or whatever. It just feels, when you try to represent every single group of people in a single deck, it risks being inauthentic, and then I think ultimately becomes inauthentic. And as a deck creator myself, I just feel like I don't know how do you create a deck like that? And of course, like, you should research, you should take this very seriously, you should consult different people and really make sure you're doing your part. But at the same time, I just feel like, how do you create a deck that seeks to represent different people and multiple groups of people and different kinds of people? How do you decide which group of people gets what archetype? Because there's like a lot of stereotypes and power dynamics in choosing what to put on, like, which group of people gets what archetype. You know, for example, like, some people might feel some type of way, me included, if you put a person on a wheelchair on a chariot card. Maybe some people like that. Maybe some people think it's empowering, but it's kind of like, it becomes a little divisive and it becomes a little controversial. And obviously, a diverse deck, I would imagine you wouldn't put white people on the Empress and Emperor card, because those are figures of power. And it's just like, it's like, you wouldn't want to do that, because the whole point is to topple the white patriarchy, right? I mean, and yeah, like, how do you, I haven't really reconciled this in my brain. Like, how do you decide which group of people would get what card? Because there's stereotypes in that too. Like, for example, personally, I would really love to see a non-hetero couple that is not the Lovers or the Two of Cups or the traditionally sort of the relationship card or the couple card. Like, I would love to see a non-hetero couple, like on the Sun card. I don't know if there's a deck out there that represents a non-hetero couple like in the Sun card, because that would be a very powerful archetype. That would be a very powerful expression. It's like living in your truth and not being afraid, right? It's like a little overdone. Like, every time I get a diverse deck or I see pictures of a diverse deck, and of course a Lovers is going to be like a non-hetero couple. And I remember Star Spinner Tarot created multiple Lovers cards to represent different kind of sexualities and gender identities out there. And that's fine. I think that's perfectly awesome. But at the same time, it's kind of like diversity has a lot of stereotypes too. And it just, how do you reconcile what gets what? You know, what gets put on what? Because ultimately, it's still I think it's a little tricky to navigate, because there is still kind of like a power struggle when you're trying to assign archetypes to the different groups of people. Like what I said, you would probably never choose to put a white person on the Emperor card, especially a white man, like, because I would imagine that would be problematic. I think it's just like a very complicated issue, and I personally haven't found a authentic way to do that kind of assignment. Like, how do you do that? Like, it's like there's just no way to please every group of people, or there's just no way. I mean, you could say like, oh, this is backed up by your research, this is backed up by you really doing the homework and consulting the people from that background to check in with them to see if they're really okay with the card. But at the same time, like, what is the point of this deck other than just being diverse and just to have every person in there? I mean, I think in and of itself, that could be a very important thing to do. Like, that could be a very noble goal. Like, I think it's important to have diverse representations, obviously, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know if it's just not done well or we just haven't figured out a way to do it. It just feels like thematically it really lacks a punch. Like, it just, because there's so much more an archetype could offer, and it's so much more a deck creator could offer when you really work on the thematic significance of your entire deck. I think a deck really becomes more powerful, the individual archetypes become more powerful when you concept the deck as a whole, right? I think when it's tied by a powerful theme, when it's connected by a powerful theme, I think each archetype becomes much more alive. You know, like it could create a stronger subconscious and archetypal and intuitive impact. But when it's just like for the sake of, okay, it's just a collection of cards with different faces and different skin tones and different identities, then it's like that becomes all that there is. I mean, I guess in and of itself, it's also like, it's a good thing, but at the same time, it's just like, it feels a little hollow, like it feels a little soulless. And this is just how I feel. I'm not saying like this is a problem, and I feel like this isn't something like I'm complaining about, but it's just like, I mean, this is great, but at the same time, it just feels a little, like I said, a little empty, a little hollow. I don't know how to go about it. What I would love to see, what I would call a diverse deck, isn't like needing to cram everything into one deck. Tarot is the human experience, right? The 78 cards of tarot is the encapsulation of the human experience, and there's just so much more as a deck creator we could tell and show. I personally believe that creating a tarot deck is a sacred journey. When you create a tarot deck, you're really channeling your experience, your voice, your spirit, your personality, your worldview. You're channeling all of that, and you're expressing all of that through the framework of tarot, through the archetypes of tarot. And I think creating a tarot deck is such a beautiful thing and such an amazing journey of self-discovery and expression and empowerment. And I personally, I think a diverse deck would be a deck with a very strong story and a very strong worldview. I think maybe that's why I have issues with decks that are just like pictures of the world that we see, and it doesn't really delve deeper into a specific facet of life or a specific theme under the umbrella of diversity, because there's so much to be said about diversity. And I think it's just like, honestly, doing tarot a disservice if you just try to cram different faces in there but not really explore the significance and meaning and impact in the actual experiences of these people. And I think it's impossible to cram in every single experience into one deck. And I think it's just more, I personally would like to see a deck that focuses on, say, one group of people or one theme that are experienced by multiple groups of people, and really hones in on that theme and really encapsulates that theme, and not just a bunch of pictures and not just a collection of faces. You know what I mean? Like, it's not just a collection of faces or identity, it's actually a full story. It's actually a very specific story, because that's when the story becomes meaningful, when it's like a little up close and personal, right? So I think I would like to see a deck like that when it comes to representation or diversity. It's not that we need to cram every single group of people into one deck. We need to feature different types of stories and decks that feature different themes under the umbrella of diversity. We need to kind of create more of those decks, and we need to create and spotlight and highlight more of those decks. So that is what I personally would like to see when it comes to a diverse representing deck. I don't want to just see like another token deck where it's just like, oh, this is a deck of tokens. It's almost like a souvenir, you know? It's not really like a story. It's just like you've been there, you want to pick up something, and then you buy it from the museum or whatever. So it's kind of like, it doesn't have a lasting impact, right? Okay, so I want to talk about my journey as a deck creator and sort of my musings as a deck creator when it comes to diversity and identity and representation and things like that. As a creator, as a creative, I can't help it, but all of the things that I want to create feature non-human figures, and they're just all animal decks. And in a way, I've had it easy because I never really had to think about representations of different body types or races or cultures or gender identities, because everything that I create is animals or cartoon figures that resemble a human person, but they're not human. They're not really human. So in a sense, I've kind of had it easy, and I didn't do this on purpose. I'm not doing this for the sake of avoiding this type of conversation or avoiding engaging with the topic of diversity. I do it because I genuinely just am more attuned to animals, and I'm just attracted to creating things in the image of animals. I'm attracted to fairy tales and fables, and you know how like the figures in those stories are typically animals, and animals are really what I feel a strong like affection and kinship to, and that's just kind of what I want to create as a creator. And to not do that would be going against my creative calling and who I am as a person. So I'm really not doing it to avoid a conversation. I have been thinking about that a lot. What can I do as a decorator to really bring awareness and shed awareness on this, to make an impact, to really contribute, right? For me, when it comes to like my racial identity, my gender identity and things like that, I feel like I'm not really an authority to speak on those issues, just because growing up in Canada, Canada is not without its racist history and racist issues and obviously all that jazz. But I honestly grew up without truly experiencing oppression. I've never encountered a racist incident. There were sort of racially charged annoyances sprinkled here and there when I was growing up, but none of them really traumatized me. None of them really defined my identity. So for me personally, growing up in Canada, I was born in Taiwan, and I immigrated with my family to Canada when I was 13 years old. So I'm like 1.5 gen. Even back in Taiwan, like the race was never a forefront of my identity. I never felt the need to identify myself as Asian Canadian, other than like when I have to make a video like this, I might mention it. I'm like, oh, I'm Asian Canadian, but it was never something I felt a strong connection to. I never felt the need to say that I'm Asian Canadian. I never needed to say like, oh, I'm not straight anymore. I'm actually bi. That's another story, okay, for another time. But I never felt the need to say like I'm Asian Canadian and bisexual like to anyone. Like I never introduced myself like that. I always just sort of like, hey, I'm Kim. I think I never really experienced anything when I was growing up during my upbringing for me to really need to experience that as a forefront of my identity. My family never made it a forefront of my identity. My friends and my community, and when I was growing up at school, etc., never made that a forefront of my identity. You know, I just kind of grew up relatively like out of it, I guess. And this is one of the reasons why I don't like to speak about this issue, because even though I have a lot of thoughts and perspectives on this, I would often get bashed for being a traitor, for not having a strong emotional wound from being oppressed. I was often encountered with the attitude that, oh, you don't care about this enough. Like, how come you're not angry about this, or as angry as we are? And I remember at the time feeling very frustrated because I was so sick and tired of being told that I was oppressed. Part of the reason why I never really wanted to talk about this with anyone is because like there seems to be one narrative that only I am allowed to have. And as an Asian Canadian woman, I can only identify with the role of being oppressed, like by white people or by societal norms and the societal expectations. And I remember just being so tired of being told that I needed to be oppressed, or I needed to feel oppressed in order to join in on the dialogue, in order to join in on the conversation. Again, it was never explicitly said to me, but there just seems to be one narrative for people of color, and that is that you are freaking oppressed. And I was like, I understand oppression exists, and this is a real problem in society. Like, I understand this is a real problem, but I'm allowed to have a different experience, and this is something I've have to make peace with like much later, because I remember just feeling the rage and frustration of like being told that I need to be oppressed, but not really identifying with that narrative, and I just didn't know what my narrative was. But now I do. I remember like needing to make my peace with that. It's just like, you know what, I am allowed to have a different perspective and a different narrative, but still recognizing the issues that are present that need solving. So that's one of the reasons why I didn't make this video for a long time. I don't know if I mentioned in the beginning of the video, like I actually want to make this video for a very long time, not like a response to that panel, because obviously that panel didn't happen until last weekend, but I want to talk about diversity and representation in the decorating world and me as a decorator, etc. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and the reason why I didn't want to do it is because like I was just a little afraid that people are going to be like, but you're not allowed to have this narrative. Like, you're Asian, you're supposed to be oppressed, you're supposed to be complaining about all of this, you're supposed to be demanding justice and whatnot. And yeah, going back to sort of me as a decorator creating animal decks, I was saying like it's not that I'm trying to bypass these issues on purpose, but it is in a way bypassing when I create an animal deck, because when I created Way of the Panda Tarot, in a way it is bypassing because I never thought about those issues, but it's not like I meant to bypass those issues on purpose, you know? But even pandas could be sort of raced. I remember like a woman messaged me about my Two of Swords, and on the card there's this panda sort of drinking tea, and it's like a very clearly British setting. It's like this cute porcelain teacup with like a tea bag steeping. It's like this very English looking teacup, right? And I remember this woman messaging me telling me that that's not a Chinese tea, like that's not Chinese pandas don't drink this tea. And I was like, first of all, they're pandas. They don't drink tea to begin with. Second of all, I know they're like very specifically associated with the Chinese culture. I mean, I've been drinking out of an IKEA mug for years. I guess I betray my ancestors and dishonor my family. But you know what I mean? Like, it was really weird. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is, but yeah, like it really makes me think, because in the panel, in that video, in that conversation, Queen Auset posed a bunch of questions at the end, towards the end of that conversation, to deck creators to really make us reflect about the impact that we're making with our decks. For example, some of the questions were, what if 1 million people used your product? What kind of impact would you love to make, or would you have made, or what would be the impact maybe of a deck that you already created? What is the worst headline your deck could get? There's some other ones, I didn't write down all of them, but those two were the ones that really struck a chord. You know, what would be the maximum impact that your deck could have, and what would be like the worst, what would be the most problematic thing about your deck? And when it comes to positive impact, I was pretty clear on what Way of the Panda could do. When I create a deck, I really take it very seriously. Like I said before, I really see it as a sacred journey, it's a sacred creative journey, especially with tarot, which is a deck of 78 cards encapsulating the human experience. It's such a rich opportunity for you to deepen into your understanding of yourself, of the world, to share who you are, to express your voice, to really make an impact with the ideas that you embed in the art and in the archetypes that you choose to portray in a certain way. It's just a perfect way to leave behind a legacy. You know, that's how I view deck creation. Each deck I create has a meaning. It has a specific impact that I'm trying to make, and it has a very specific perspective that I'm trying to communicate to the world. I want it to be like, if you hold this deck in my hand and I will be dead, you would know exactly what I thought on the subject. Like, you would, if you use my deck, it would be like talking to me. It will be interacting with my ideas, or what my ideas have become after it's engaged with a lot of other people, etc. Like, that's sort of my intention as a deck creator every time I create a deck. You know, I'm not creating decks just for a cash grab, you know, for shallow reasons. I really create a deck. I really see it as an amazing and powerful and magical opportunity to really share your worldview with others, to really make an impact, you know. So I remember thinking about Queen Auset's question about like, what if 100 or even 1,000 million billions of people use your deck, and what would the impact be? And I was really clear on that, like, because that's how I sort of started with every single deck that I curate. And then when it comes to what is the worst headline your deck could generate, and I don't know if this is just like creator's blind spot, but I was thinking for Way of the Panda Tarot, I really cannot think of a negative impact. If you have a problem with pandas, you must be psychotic, right? but seriously though, I think I kind of had it easy with a Way of the Panda deck, like a panda themed deck, just because pandas are just so beloved in the culture and then in the collective consciousness. They're just so protected and treasured anyway, so it's kind of like hard to find a negative impact. So let me know if I have a blind spot, if you can think of anything that Way of the Panda Tarot or panda themed tarot deck could potentially do. So yeah, I honestly really can't think of any negative consequences of this deck, other than I really can't. It might just be because, honestly, I think I really had it easy with a panda themed deck. Can't say that about the other panda themed deck though. That deck was a freaking mess. Oh my god. So much appropriation. Like, oh, okay, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make my own deck. Yeah, so after thinking about that, because after thinking that, okay, I kind of had it easy with animal themed decks, like I don't really have a lot to say forefront about diversity and representation in human forms, you know what I mean? Like, I don't really have a lot to say about that. My decks don't really speak to that, and I don't see myself creating decks in the future to address that, because that's not really aligned with my creative vision. That doesn't really align with who I am as a person. But that I think about that, right? And that doesn't mean I don't want to contribute, you know? I think being able to sort of have discussions like this, being able to have conversations about diversity and race and justice, etc., that's so important because these problems are real. You know, people are suffering because of the systematic injustice. People are, I remember Queen Auset saying like every day her head has to explode multiple times just because of the stupidity and nonsense that she has to face as a Black woman in America. Those are that's very, very real, and then we have to do something. I want to do something. But like, I don't see myself making an impact directly addressing those things just because, number one, I don't know enough about it. And I'm not saying this as an excuse, as in like, oh, I just don't want to do the research. I'm mostly saying it because that's not really aligned with my soul, you know? That's not really aligned with like what I want to do. Again, like, I'm not saying like that's not something like I don't want to do, because I do want to contribute, but I believe we all have a unique gift, and even though it's not directly sort of uses the language of diversity and representation, it's not something that's super obvious right away to be that is sort of addressing this issue. I do believe we all have an important role to play, right? So I think about what I can do as a deck creator, because one way would obviously to attempt to create a deck that kind of addresses that, seeks to represent different people, but I honestly can't see myself doing that because that's not my creative truth. I really want to just make decks that feature animals because they are the archetypes that resonate with me deeply. That's where my creative spirit wants to go. So I'm not going to do anything just for the sake of doing it, but that's not aligned with my creative truth, so I'm not going to do that. But I do think about what I can do, and I think about my own experiences and how I come to terms with wanting to how I came to terms with feeling courageous enough to join this conversation, because for a lot of people it's not easy, right? It's like emotions run really high when we talk about things like race or social justice or identities. Like when we talk about ideologies or even political identity politics and stuff like that, emotions run really high. There's just a lot of extremities and polarizations, and it's really hard to navigate conversations like that. I personally have found it difficult to navigate conversations like that because emotions run so high. It's so easy to feel rejected, offended, hurt. I could talk about anything else and I would still be like relatively at peace, even if someone disagrees with me strongly, even if someone's kind of negatively towards me. But when it comes to like your identity, when it comes to your worldview, it's a very sensitive subject and it's really hard to navigate. And I reflect on my personal experience and journey with that, because for the longest time I just didn't want to touch it. I'm just like, I just had enough of people telling me that I need to be oppressed, and I'm tired of hearing people tell me that there's only one narrative for you as an Asian person in white America or North America dominated by white people, or like there's only one way to think about this. I'm just really tired of ideological wars and those buzzwords. I'm just really tired of that. But how I came to terms with those and how I made peace with where I am and how I'm positioned and what I think and what my narrative is really like, you would say it's homework. It's like, but it's not homework done in the specific lane of like, okay, I need to be able to come to terms with the narrative. It's kind of diving into my past and healing the wounds of my past that has to do with rejection and authority and people telling me what to think. And that is a very, very long story that cannot be fitted into this video. But long story short, and what I'm trying to say is like how I came to terms with feeling at peace and feeling that I'm able to express my voice and chime in and join in on this conversation and really engage and really think about what I can do as a person to benefit the society, to contribute, to help solve problems, is having the courage to face my past and having the courage and doing the shadow work to help resolve some of the things that were still sort of carried by my wounded inner child. And again, this is like a totally different video, but I think what I'm trying to get across is like something I'm really passionate about is shadow work, and specifically in the context of inner child work. Oh my god, inner child work is one of the most potent ways to do shadow work. Let me just put it like this, okay? Again, this is a very long story, but long story short, if I didn't do all the work involving myself, not, like has nothing to do with gender representation or diversity or whatever, if I didn't go inward and really solve the problems that I have with myself and within my individual, within my soul, within my emotional narrative, and if I didn't make peace with my past, or I didn't heal, try to heal and work through my issues and the issues and the wounds that my inner child was carrying, I wouldn't be where I am today telling you this, making this video, thinking about what I can do next. You really can't fix the bullshit of this world if you don't fix your own bullshit. I think it's just incredibly difficult to have conversations about about social change or social impact when you don't have your own shit together. So I think about what I can do as a decorator and what I can offer, what I can contribute when it comes to this overarching work that we have to do as a collective, as a community, as human people. I think what I want to do, at least for now, what I'm really called to is inner child work and shadow work. And I think we really cannot talk about larger human issues if we don't do our own shadow work, if we don't resolve the shit that we have in our own psyche, because we can't start to clean up the world if we're a mess ourselves. And I think that's really where how I want to tackle this is, as a decorator, is really create something or share things that would, from a place of compassion, from a place of love, from a place of understanding, in the sense that I want to be able to hold space for people to solve the issues and the mess within themselves, so that they could talk about what's the larger issues at hand, because I wasn't really able to keep a calm head when I was talking about those things for the longest time, because I just could not work through my resentment about being told that I only had one narrative, and also the shadows behind that, because I grew up with some abusive teachers in my past, and I was just so sick of being told what I needed to think and what I needed to feel. And that was a wound that had nothing to do with representation or diversity, but that was a wound I needed to overcome and heal from, so I could begin to engage in conversations like that. I can begin to show up better and be a bigger person in the world. And I really wasn't able to do that until I sorted through my own shit. And sometimes doing the work doesn't mean that maybe like for a white person, I know like if you're white, you're probably like constantly faced with that you need to do the work and come to terms with your white privilege and things like that. But I think it's like, it's much more than that. It's like you can't begin to examine those things if you haven't had a habit of examining yourself and your own psyche and your own shit. So I think inner work is so important, especially when we're talking about showing up for the world and trying to make an impact. If we're not taking responsibility for our past, for the things that happened to us, for the things that are stopping us from engaging with those things, then there really is it's just a dead end. Like, we just really need to be able to feel complete and feel whole, at least within ourselves, to begin to want to start to heal the world, you know, to show up in a better way. And I think that cannot happen until we do the inner work. And that's really where I want to position myself. And that's really where I want to be. That's sort of like that liminal point where you want to start talking about changing the world, but you just gotta start changing yourself. What do you need to do so that you can open yourself up for dialogues and conversations like this? What do you need to resolve? Maybe you don't need to resolve any of your white guilt or white privilege. You need to start with maybe like this one thing that you experienced as a kid, or as a person of color, maybe, or as someone who with a conforming and non-traditional identity. You may need to heal the wounds from your inner child, like from your childhood, so that you could show up in the world in the better way, you know, because we can't heal the world when we constantly declare ourselves to be broken. We cannot empower the powerless when we are trapped in our own victimhood. I think that's important to really resolve. You know, we need to resolve our own victimhood. We need to resolve our own inner child wounds. We need to resolve our own shadows before we could tackle structures of power. Because it's impossible to win a war when you're still a victim, when you still identify as the wrong one, as the weakened one, as the one that had been oppressed. You can't. How do you tap into your power when you identify as such, when you act as such, you know? Well, so that's what I think, and I think that's how I want to contribute as a deck creator, is to create decks that really address that liminal space, to create tools for personal development. And I know this sounds incredibly generic, but it's honestly what I believe to be the right thing to do. It's something that's meaningful for me. I do want to show up more and talk about how you could figure out your own narrative and figure out your own strength and figure out how you can contribute when it comes to dialogues like this, when it comes to injustices, when it comes to like the problems in society regarding identity and regarding the color of your skin, etc. Like I really want to make a point to people that this isn't an ideological war, and all the things that you've been hearing, and maybe narratives that have been pushed on you, especially ideological narratives. You have the right to unpack that and decide how you want to tackle that and how you can show up in your own way, on your own time. Our world's pretty fucked, but it just like we just have to keep going and continue to embark on that journey, right? Like it just, you know, like I feel like we just need to keep going. And I could go on and on about this, but this video is literally hitting an hour and I have to edit this, so I probably will want to make a part 2. But yeah, I mean, I think in the other video, I'm also like really hungry. I'm starving. I actually wanted to talk about like allyship and what I think about the whole ally thing, and as a person of color, what I would want a white ally to look like, or just an ally in general to look like. I kind of want to go deeper into that. I want to explore that, but I'm so hungry and this video has gone on for an hour and I'm just like, probably just gonna end it here for now. So yeah, this is kind of like my response to that video and some of the things that I've been thinking about in regarding some of the things addressed in that panel and that video. And I definitely will like to make more videos about this and explore these topics more, because like I said, I still have a lot to say about this, and there's still a lot of things I want to address and dive deeper in, etc. If you made it this far, thank you so much for listening, and let me know if you resonated. Let me know if there's anything that you disagree with me about or agree with me on, etc. Leave a comment in the comment section and I will be sure to read every single one of them. And if you feel like there is a need to school me on something, go right ahead. Always here to learn. Always wanting to learn more. So so yeah, like I would love to hear what you guys think and continue the conversation. My thoughts, it's constantly evolving, so I'm so glad to be joining in on a conversation, and please let me know what you think. I really would love to know. And yeah, until next time, stay cute but fierce, and you're super awesome. Thank you. Bye.